All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Big Easiest Ways to Wellness. Dr. Holly MacKenna, Integrative Psychiatrist from Dara Wellness, and I'm here with Eric Kussin, who is amazing founder of the Same Here organization. So a little bit about why I twisted Eric's arm to come here today. As folks in New Orleans know, we are finally back to having some NBA basketball. And as folks who know me know, I'm a basketball girl. I grew up with Duke basketball. I am now living my best life with the pro Duke team in my local community. And being married to the guy that's calling the games, our lives at home are way more calm when he's doing what he loves. So it's a win-win-win for me right now. So scrimmage game started last night. We won, of course, because we're amazing. And, that got me thinking about, this pandemic has really affected all of us, and thinking about how it affects athletes specifically. I have so many athletes in my life because of what my husband does and because he's an athlete himself. But, I also talking to folks who use exercise and their whatever athletic prowess to help stabilize their moods. I realized with this pandemic and with the changes that have happened so much on all levels of sports, that people are really having to make some adjustments. So I asked Eric to come talk to us, and I think we should start because not everyone knows you and Same Here Global. So if you wouldn't mind maybe telling us a little bit about how that all came to be. I love this story.
Sure.
So,
yeah. Of course. Obviously, with your love of basketball, similar passion on my end. I played every sport growing up, and then I played it at a college that does not have the same pageantry that Duke does at Cornell University as a walk-on. But walk-on, so that kind of puts me a notch down. I'm more of the dive on the floor, get loose balls type of person.
I feel like that's every student's dream though. I feel like the students, the walk-ons are the most popular players in a lot of ways. Just saying.
If sports was popular on campus there, then maybe that would be the case. It's maybe more of my own dream being lived out. But no, it was, look, and the fascinating thing is having a interest in sports and a focus on sports, I think is part and parcel of my mental health journey, because part of it was so positive for me, and part of it was actually negative, and I'll get into that. But leaving Cornell and getting an opportunity to go work for the NBA league office, and my first boss at a school was a guy named Mark Tatum, who's now the deputy commissioner of the NBA under Adam Silver. So I trial by fire, got right into it right at the beginning, and was thrust into a position where I was working with players on what we called the business of basketball, explaining to them how revenues are generated. And in fairness to the guys who were coming into the league back then, there wasn't the one and done rule. So Kevin Garnett was coming into the league from high school. Kobe Bryant was coming into the league from high school, right? So you had Amari Stoudemire coming into the league from high school. And so these guys were thinking, understandably so, because they didn't have the background education on it, that the way that they were making their millions was by a billionaire owner saying, here's some of my millions, come play for my team. And not having a full perspective of ticket sales and sponsorship sales and arena revenues and concessions. And so early on at 22, 23 years old, I'm traveling around the country talking with these guys that I idolized, funny enough, in high school and in college. And now all of a sudden I'm in front of them and I'm presenting to them. And so you have to take on a slightly different demeanor with that. And that led to then positions working for various WNBA, NBA, and even NHL teams on the revenue side of things, because in sports, your husband's doing the broadcasting. It's a little bit of church and state. There's the business side and then the basketball side. Right. And unless you're either a former player or have some big name, there's very few scouts who move their way up and then get that chance to be the head of a basketball operations organization. It's usually those former players with those big names, understandably so. That's not a judgmental thing. And they know the game really well. And so the path that I went down was more on the business side, of the goal being a team president. And so taking these different positions, moving to Chicago and Phoenix, back to New Jersey, then down to Florida. And I'm in Florida. I have this role, Chief Revenue Officer, and it's the second in line at that organization to what would be the CEO. So at a young point in my career, 34 years old, I'm thinking this is a great step. This is where I want to be. The ownership group had just purchased a team, brought two of us in, gutted out the old business operations, and allowed us to try and build it from scratch. And again, that all seems like a dream opportunity, except for 6 months in, it was like my brain and my body hit a brick wall and I fell apart. Lost interest in everything outside of the office, going to playing my own rec league games, going to meet friends, going to the gym, going on dates. All those things went away. And then I started to lose cognitive functioning, and it became as serious as not being able to focus at work, not being able to have conversations like this, not being able to follow thought tracks. And I thought maybe I have a brain tumor, or I had an aneurysm, or this is the buildup of a traumatic brain injury that I had from playing sports for so long. And I didn't know from mental health. Historically, we're talking about the beginning of 2015. So,
Right.
there wasn't much conversation going on about mental health then. We could even debate whether or not there's enough conversation going on about mental health now, 5 years later,
Right.
but and certainly not. So, short part of that story is I took 2.5 years off, thinking I would only be taking a couple months off to get myself well. I went on this journey to try and find health, but that led me towards 50 different psychotropic drug combinations by going to psychopharmacologists who just kept feeding me SSRI, SNRI, MAOI, tricyclic. And I laid in a bed for that 2.5 years, dysfunctional, staring at the ceiling, no original thoughts coming to my brain, just waiting for a miracle pill to kick in. Was then told to try TMS therapy. I did 23 sessions of that, developed suicidal ideations for the first time in my life, which we can talk about what this feel like. And then that led me towards voluntarily checking into a psych ward. And I go to the psych ward, and again, skipping a lot of details, but the attending psychiatrist, who's supposed to be top in the industry, looking at all the awards on her wall, she looks at my chart on day one and says, "Eric, you've tried everything there is. Your last resort is to do shock therapy." And, you being an integrative practitioner, one of the reasons, again, we'll go back to why I got into this space is because I don't want anyone to ever hear from a doctor, it doesn't matter if it's physical or it's mental health, that this is your last resort. I think that's a ridiculous thing for any doctor to ever tell anyone, because I would go outside, I've told you this before, and eat 10 scoops of dirt if it meant that the minerals in the dirt were going to help me get better, right? We'd all try anything.
Right.
When you have an athletic background where you're willing to run stadium stairs until 3 a.m. to get into good shape, you're going to do anything you can to heal. So anyway, I did the shock therapy. I didn't feel any better. I come home thinking, because of what this woman said, my life is over. I'm laying in a twin bed, staring back at the ceiling. And I'm fortunate enough that my mother meets this woman who practices what's called integrative psychology. And what was explained to me, because I didn't know what integrative meant at the time, that it's a brain-body connection. She's a yoga practitioner, a psychologist, and so she combines the two. She treats people differently than most practitioners that you've been to, so give her a try. So I go with her, and I sit on her couch, and she's the first doctor / practitioner who, in the 2.5 years that I've been through this process, who starts the conversation by asking, "Eric, can you tell me a little bit about your life?" Because every other doctor asks, "Eric, what are your symptoms? What are you feeling? Okay, based on what you're feeling, here's how we can help you." And so, I guess, looking back on it, I should have realized these things accumulated in my system. But when you only have one life and you've only been through one life, and that's what you know life as, you don't think of it any differently in terms of how it's impacting you. You're like, just this is what life is. So for me, was 8 years old. My brother was 12. I'm the middle of 3 boys. So my older brother, he was in an accident, sporting accident, broke his femur bone, and was in a body cast for a year and then homeschooled. A lot of people get into accidents. So again, you don't think much of it. A month later, after coming out of the cast, he's diagnosed with ALL, a children's form of leukemia. So 5 years of chemo and radiation. Back then, the chemo is not as well targeted, so it takes a much longer amount of time to really knock it out of your system. But again, miracle, goes into remission, cancer's out of his system. A month later, it was like a cadence. He's in a Jeep Wrangler with his friends. You know how open Jeep Wranglers are and how they are. No seatbelt in the back. The car loses control. My brother flies out, lands on his head, cracks his head open, loses partial vision in his eye, and is in ICU for a month.
Wow.
Heals from that, goes to Cornell himself. So he went before I did. My father went there as well. So we kind of have it in our blood, kind of like how a lot of Dukies do. And between his junior and senior year, he starts to feel a pain in his knee. They do some testing, and through blood tests, they find out that the cancer's come back, the childhood cancer. So amazingly, he goes to to law school at Hofstra, makes law review as he's getting his chemo and radiation treatments. But I'm now switching places with him. I'm at college, and learn that the chemo is taking such an effect on the good cells in his body that his body's breaking down. My father calls me one morning. He's got 105 fever. They're bringing him to the hospital. His body goes into what's called septic shock, where your organs start attacking themselves. That makes him fall into a coma. And now I'm driving back and forth from school. My parents are living basically at the hospital at the Ronald McDonald House. And for 3 months, the neurology reports, especially back in the late 90s, aren't able to tell us whether or not he's going to have any brain activity or if he's going to wake and have any type of cognitive function about him. But miracle again, he wakes up, right? And he's able to talk with us. And so we're celebrating that, but his kidneys fail from the rigor of the septic shock. He goes on dialysis. We all end up getting tested to see who's the closest match. My father is, so my father donates a kidney to him. That all ends. And then finally, a year later, over the course of a year, 3 of my close friends in their 20s pass away of heart conditions, right? And it's like just this
so much.
Thing after thing after thing. And I didn't know what stress and trauma were. So this woman sitting there, I'm giving you, the shorter story of it, but basically explaining to me that I had a front row courtside seat for these events in my life that were building up in my system that are eventually going to take me down if I do nothing about them. And I didn't understand that concept of taking me down, because going back to how working in sports and loving sports is a positive and a negative for anyone out there who's got any passion for anything. There are positives and negatives to having passions. Others having passions are you wake up every morning and you've got something that you're excited about. The negative part about passion is you don't think to what else do I need to work on? What else is going on in my life that I have to actually pay attention to, because it feels so good to wake up every morning and do the thing that you're passionate about. And parallel paths going on where work is great. I'm enjoying sports. I'm living in different markets. I'm meeting great people. Oh shit, the stress and trauma is building up, but you don't realize it. And eventually it takes you over. And I guess because I loved what I did so much, and because I experienced so much of what I did when I was a kid, I almost had the perfect storm of so much built up, so much resiliency, that when the resiliency finally was gone, it took me down in such a harsh way.
Right.
So I end up, again, short story, I end up healing through breathing practices of all things. And, the funny story I told you was I'm the only man, only one under 40 at the time, and only one born in this country. It's me and 8 Indian women learning this breathing kriya that they called it. But 30 days into doing the practice, I start feeling better. And I share my story on LinkedIn. We were talking about LinkedIn earlier. And there were no rules in 2017. This is like August of May of 2017. And it was 35 minutes to read the article. And I didn't know from digital marketing. I didn't have Instagram. I didn't have Twitter. So I just put it up there, and I put my telephone number up there. And 3 days, it gets read 150,000 times. It just keeps getting shared. And I get these calls from all over the world, not just the US, as far as China. And the commonality that I realize in all of these calls is people are sharing what their life experiences have been and the stressful and traumatic things they've been through. They're not sharing disorder labels. They're not saying, Eric, I have bipolar, or Eric, I have schizophrenia, or I have unipolar depression. It's all, I lost a child to SIDS, right? That was one end of the spectrum, all the way to, and again, we talked about this story. 32-year-old woman called me and said, I've been married for 7 years. I got married at 25, got 2 beautiful kids, a handsome husband, white picket fence house. Everything's great. However, for the last 10 years, since I graduated college at 22, I've woken up with a pit in the middle of my stomach because I broke up with my 4-year college boyfriend. And as much as I love my current husband and I think he's amazing, you always question, did I stay with the right person? Were they my soulmate, right? So you hear those things, and when you hear those, those different ends of the spectrum, what you realize is whether it's life events that happen to us or things that we choose that are part of the life's path that we perseverate about and obsess over, this stuff continues to build inside of us, this stress and trauma. And the end result is how it makes us feel is very similar. Lethargic, difficult time getting out of bed, right? Not able to think clearly in meetings, right? And so, okay, if that's what mental health is, why is it that our society doesn't understand that we should be taking care of our mental health and proactively working on it the way that we do our physical health, right? You grow up, your coach immediately tells you, run those stadium stairs I was talking about, lift these weights, do these drills. No one tells you to do drills for this. And so I went to the largest nonprofit websites in our country. And with, by the way, with the goal of, I've got contacts in sports. If someone's telling the story the right way, I'll go back into sports. I will give them my contacts, whoever I have, let them grow and build this thing so that they can get the word out there, and I'll go back into sports. Now, there was a fulfillment piece of helping people, certainly, that I was enjoying. But even at that point, it was like, okay, let's see what's out there. And what I found was all these organizations were almost using a template and copying each other. Three pieces to that template that I felt like, at least as a marketer, was actually moving us further away from healing as a society and understanding this topic in a global perspective. So first piece was they all started with the stat 1 in 5 people are mentally ill. Right. Which begs the question, if we're saying that 20% of people are mentally ill, what are we telling the other 4 and 5 and 80% of people? We're telling them they're healthy, normal, fine, and okay. Well, if everybody deals with some kind of combination of breakups and divorce and job losses and bullying and cyberbullying and verbal abuse and sexual abuse, and that's only a list of 8 of the 80 things that can happen to us stressfully and traumatic in our lives, saying 1 in 5 is completely leaving out everyone in society who's going through something, who needs to work on proactively, building up their mental health. So, okay, already we're not talking to enough people, and we're making it about the haves and the have-nots. Exactly. Okay. What was the next thing I noticed? All their campaigns were mirror images of each other. It was action word followed by stigma. So stop the stigma, stomp the stigma, erase the stigma, break the stigma. And if you think a layer deeper on what stigma is, one, you're reminding people that there is stigma when you keep throwing those campaigns out there. But secondly, talking about being inclusive versus exclusive, what stigma means is there's a group of people out there that we believe are forming opinions and judgments unfairly about this other group of poor people who are going through something. That's creating 2 different groups, right? That's you people right there who are doing this to these people over here. I've never seen a social change movement where you have people at different ends and your rallying cry is, you all stop doing that, and that brings people together. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah, right? Yeah, we've tried and tried, but nope, hasn't worked.
You come together based on your commonalities. You don't come together based on stopping your differences. That's illogical, and it's not the way nature works. And then, the final piece was the way that all the celebrities' stories were being told. It was this, a tabloid model of celebrity name plus disorder name plus erratic behavior. So Britney Spears has depression, shaves her head. Lindsay Lohan has anxiety, dresses like a hot mess. Charlie Sheen has addiction, looks like a skeleton, and can't get up in the morning. Okay, if that's what our celebrity example of what the 1 in 5 looks like, and we're only talking about the 1 in 5, no wonder the other 80% are saying, that's not me. I don't look like that. I don't do that.
Nope. I'm not going to see a psychiatrist. No.
So, of course, people are going to be tuning the message out. And of course, you're only getting a certain amount of people that are interested in this. And so that was the impetus for forming the organization, which started as an umbrella name. We're all a little crazy. And for anyone who hears that term and might get a little triggered by it, please hear my rationale on it. Crazy is a term we use in everyday conversations to not mean mentally ill. Right. Holly, that necklace you're wearing looks crazy good on you, right? Your logo is crazy creative. This sandwich tastes crazy good, right? So could you take a word that we use in everyday language, put quotes around it in the logo, make the A upside down, and talk about it as mental health on a continuum, right? We all are a little bit of crazy in that sense of the idiosyncrasies we develop from our parents and watching them and being with our spouses or our loved ones and the different relation that makes us all a little bit crazy, not in like the literal sense.
You know, even if you felt like that didn't include you, it's hard not to be included now, right?
Yes, right. Funny enough, you say that. So we've got a guy, Brian, on our board, and the first time I ever explained this concept to him, it was brilliant. It kind of just spontaneously came to him. He said, "So it's like a tribe you're creating that everyone in the world is already a member of. They just don't know it yet." And I thought that was such an interesting way to put it. Yes, everyone is a part of this group, but we don't have everyone yet raising their hand and saying they're a part of it, because the misconception is by raising my hand, I'm saying I'm in the bipolar group, or I'm in the victim group, or I'm in the psych ward group, right? That's not the case. It's this continuum. And so now if we were going to walk what we talked from a campaign perspective, okay, that's the name of our organization. What was the call to action in our campaign? If we thought stop and stomp the stigma separates us, what would bring us together? And so that was how we came up with the Same Here campaign, which is an American Sign Language sign. So it's like you were just making thumb point at the chest, finger pointed out at someone else. And in the case of talking to you, Holly, it's like, Holly, I've been through challenges. You've been through challenges in life. That's not anything that makes us weak. That's what makes us human. Why are we afraid to talk about that? If there are things that we didn't choose to have happen to us, people in our lives pass away, people in our lives break up. That's not something that we brought upon ourselves. That's stuff we should be able to talk about. Just like if we walk down the street and there was a lip in the sidewalk or something like that, and we tripped, we didn't ask for that lip in the sidewalk to be that way. It just happened, right? And so we tripped on it. So same type of thing here. There's no shame in talking about things that happened to us, right? So yeah, that's been like the last 2.5 years of my life has been trying to get the word out related to that, and then all the programming, which I'm sure we'll get a little bit into, some of the stuff that you work on with Dr. Pleener. Really just spreading a message and then spreading hands-on practical tools that can help people once they accept the idea that they're part of this tribe. Then once they're part of this tribe, what do I now do? How do we help them find a path towards wellness?
Yeah, so you mentioned Dr. Pleener. He's one of the integrative psychiatrists that is, he's the head of your Integrative Psychiatry Alliance, right? So you have these, you're kind of, as you said, you have this tribe that's really a worldwide tribe, whether they know it or not. And then you have folks who maybe offer services. You mentioned the breathing techniques that you were introduced to. Are there other specific techniques that the folks in Same Here tend to talk a lot about?
I'll give you the evolution of how that all came together and how, one, the tools, and then two, Andrew getting involved, which is kind of almost, if I could have designed it, I would have done it in the opposite direction. Okay. But you can't decide how life is going to play out to you, right? So I'll explain what happened. So, gave you the background on how the naming convention started, then the campaign started, then getting athletes involved, and from an awareness perspective, getting this concept of Same Here out there. But programmatically, if we were going to help people, we needed to provide tools that once they bought into the idea that they're also part of a Same Here story and they have their own, okay, if I go into a gym and I want to work out my body, I'm not going to only go on the treadmill every day and that's it. Some people do, but they know there's other options, right? There's elliptical, there's boxing, there's kickboxing, there's swimming, there's free weights, there's universal weights, right? So in physical health, we take it for granted that we've got this list of things in our mind that we can go and do. So my thought was, even though I healed through breathing, what other modalities are out there to heal so that we could look at mental health healing and resiliency and build up modalities the same way that we do physical health. And so I went on these odysseys to Jakarta, Indonesia to learn about Qigong meditation, and went to go meet the founder of something called Havening and why he developed that. And, met with the founder of TRE, trauma release exercises that show you how to actually tremor trauma out of your body. And what I realized was really what's happening is this stress and trauma that's built up inside of us, we have to find an active way to release and rewire it out of our system. And it just, it just hit me like, okay, the acronym of that STAR, stress and trauma, active release and rewiring, it's a positive, uplifting term that explains the very elementary science behind what we're doing. So if we were going to go to the gym and we were going to say to people, okay, in a very broad sense, you're either going to burn fat or put on muscle, people would get it. Okay, with mental health, you're either going to release or rewire the stress and trauma out of your system so you start to feel better. Why is Headspace as popular as it is? And this is no disrespect to Andy Pudicolm and what they do with their meditation process. They're as successful as they are because the name Headspace makes sense to people. There's too much going on in here. I need to create more space. That's the same reason why Calm is successful. Granted, I'm taking away some of their marketing capabilities and what they do, but I want to feel calm. I want Headspace. Duh. Okay. And it's not called modern meditation or something like that, right? Which move people who are anti-meditation out of it. It opens up a whole new system of people, or a whole new group of people that would be willing to try it. So in our case, STAR, right? And so I started reaching out, and funny enough, Donna, the woman who was my integrative psychologist when I first met, she's like, you should look at people like an Amy Weintraub. She developed yoga for depression back in the 1980s. Read her books or look at her stuff online. So I picked up the phone and called her. And she's like, what are you building? You're building an alliance of people who are coming together? I'd love to be a part of it. So that was Amy Weintraub. And then, some of the people that I mentioned before, David Bercelli for TRE, he invented.
He's amazing. Yeah.
He's incredible, and then the Andrew Kirsch developed Alpha Stim, which I wear on my ears, every day, and gets your brainwaves oscillating in the same direction. Ronald Rudin, the guy who developed Havening, so we got all these folks who championed each of these practices that, if you go on our website, are available to use. To think of it as, again, going back to that gym example, if I just want to burn fat or put muscle on, I can do any one of these things and see which one that works best for me. Well, if you're trying to release and rewire stress and trauma from your system, something might work for you, Holly, that works different for me, that works different for Andrew. We're just giving people options. And nowhere on that site is it like, hey, sign up for this course. It's $8.99. No, we're not doing that, right? We're giving people options to look. Now, when I say it happened in the opposite order with Andrew getting involved, so my integrative psychiatrist, who had me stay on a small dose of Lexapro while I was getting better, his philosophy was, you've tried way too many things. Let's keep it simple with what has worked the most for you. And let's not build drugs on top of it. Let's build these other healthy healing modalities.
Yeah.
With the way of weaning you off Lexapro eventually. But if not, okay, not the end of the world either. But drugs aren't a cure. Drugs are a Band-Aid that'll help you keep the cut from gushing so you can do the other work to get better, right? So when I met the doctor, his name was Dr. Richard Brown. He's known in the community as Dick Brown. But he had written a book called Breath, Body, Mind, and the healing practices of the breath, which, funny enough, he told me when I first met with him that when he wrote the book in the 90s, there were people in the Washington Post writing articles about how he's a quack and he's all these things. Why is that? Because there's a business around a pill being our cure, right? So if you get someone who's out there with credibility saying that breathing can heal you, that meditation can heal you, or I don't want to say heal, it's the wrong thing because there's no such thing as a cure, but start to make you feel much better and more yourself. They were trying to kind of knock that off course. And so Dr. Brown is someone who, when people would call me and say, Eric, I'm going through this, can I see your doctor? Or do you have a doctor like your doctor in my market? No, I didn't, because one, Dr. Brown made a 5:30 a.m. appointment to fit in for me to be seen because he did Donna, my psychologist, a favor. So he packed. Then he's hired by all these nonprofits to go to Tanzania and Uganda and help them with all these different practices that he teaches all over the world. So I couldn't replicate him in New York City, let alone anywhere else. And I'm thinking to myself, this sucks because I want to be able to help all these people, but I don't know who to send them to. Through a mutual friend, I get introduced to Andrew, Dr. Pleener. Just so happens Dr. Pleener and I went to high school together. Who knew, right?
Oh, nice.
He's a little younger than I am, but really sharp guy. And I'm listening to this guy talk, and I'm like, this sounds like a miniature version of Dr. Brown. Like, this is not stature and height wise, but just, like a younger. And I was like, he's not booked going on world tours. He's got his own business. Maybe he'd be open to it. So I threw the idea out to him. I was like, Andrew, do you think that we could find practitioners out there who believe in practicing this way, getting to the source, helping people find out based on their past what they might have been through, explaining how the central nervous system affects the vagus nerve when you're breathing incorrectly based on expecting bad things to happen, and inflammation happens in your body and your amygdala gets overactive. And he said, yeah, I think there's people out there. I don't know how large the group is, but I'm happy to start reaching out. He goes on his regular psychiatry Facebook page, and I'm forming this subset within the Sane Here organization of practitioners who practice in an integrative way on the psychiatry, psychology, and psychotherapy side of things. Is there anyone interested? And he got like a couple bites at the beginning, but this just shows the power of sticking with it and how things sometimes are serendipitous. Like one person ended up introducing him to like 5 people, so now like within the alliance, it's like Dr. James Blake, or James Lake, I'm sorry. And then, Will DeVere, who runs like the largest integrative psychiatry fellowship. And so he's got this network now growing, of which you're a part of doctors who have similar philosophies, so that, again, not from a revenue generating standpoint from our side, we're not trying to be opportunistic about this. We just want there to be a database so that the Erics of the world who laid in that bed don't have to lay in a bed for 2.5 years thinking I'm waiting for a magic pill to kick in, but instead there's practitioners in their area that they can go to that can get them to the source of healing. And I'll just say one more thing about that, because I'm sure people are thinking about this in their head. Eric, the healthcare system's so fucked up. Sorry for my language. Insurance is, doesn't cover things. It's so expensive. Let me just say this. The amount that I probably spent on going to doctors through insurance over 2.5 years and getting the wrong answer, it's worth it to go to one doctor who knows their stuff and can get you the right answer. Even if you have to pay out of pocket for that doctor and there's not a sliding scale, you will save way more money in the long term getting the right direction from the beginning than you will chasing your tail, getting the wrong information by being told, try this pill, that pill, that pill, that pill. Oh, you're treatment resistant. Sorry, we can't find it. We can't find the right answer for you. We're just going to keep taking you through and throwing darts at the dartboard.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's major power in that. There's also the idea that those of us who practice integrative psychiatry or integrative mental health, that we are in a partnership with the folks that come see us, which really isn't how traditional medicine was formed. It was more, paternalistic, and you do what I tell you, and a lot of wagging of the finger. We really like to meet people where they're at, which I think, especially for, a story such as yours, is really important, because if we're just looking at a chart that's full of medications that the person has failed, we might say out of frustration, like, well, it's ECT or nothing, like that's all that's going to work, rather than listening to your story and listening to the person in front of us and meeting them where they're at in that moment and unpacking all that's gone on in their lives to maybe give us a hint at what led to this first happening to someone who's an athletic young person with their future ahead of them to suddenly go into 2 years of staring at the ceiling. Like, that's pretty dramatic. And there's got to be a reason behind it. So I'm thrilled that your mom found the right person for you, and that it's taken you on this path, which it's interesting, because I think you're a perfect example, because of your athletic background, of what a lot of athletes have been going through now with the pandemic, and all levels. I mean, as you've said, people who are athletic and kind of in that realm, that's their passion. They have their goal of each game or match or what have you of winning, but there's also the passion behind it and what's driving them to be engaged in that. whether it be, the athlete themselves or the coach or whomever in that program. And now with this pandemic kind of shutting things down or changing how things are done, people have to kind of look at what it is that drives them in that direction and figure out, how to get there maybe in a different kind of way. So with that, we have the athletes at different levels, the professional athletes, like right now, they're all in this bubble, which, it sounds pretty sexy, but it's pretty dramatic. I mean, we have players who have to leave pregnant wives, on the other side of the country to go to a place where they may be exposed and, possibly bring something home to their family members. We in New Orleans have Zion Williamson, who had to leave for a family emergency, and has the that distraction, and my thoughts are with him and his family, but then also the concern of his teammates and all that kind of adds together to forms of stress that we can't even really understand. But then at levels below that, the football players in college, with this uncertainty of what their schedules are going to look like, are they going to be able to have, what they're used to, what they dreamed of, what maybe for a lot of them is why they are able to go to college. And then down, not really, but younger set of like high school, middle school. I was talking yesterday with someone who's involved at the high school level. Players are having to, at least in New Orleans, are having to decide now that they're going to go to school in person or else they can't play. Like
Right.
that's the kind of choices their families are having to make. And maybe they, have a thought that that's going to be a scholarship to help them get to college or what have you. So, there's a real place for what we've been talking about with all these different types of athletes, because, maybe what would normally help them keep their mood in check, which is, their sport of choice or what have you, isn't so accessible. So kind of with that, I wonder, you guys have this wonderful website, you have all these resources on the website, but you also do a lot of outreach that I think is important to touch on, because there might be some coaches out there or players who are feeling a little lost, and maybe some of that programming is something they could look into.
Yeah, absolutely. From a programming perspective, most of it was developed before COVID ever happened, but now,
Right.
now let's dive into COVID and understand why it's probably even that much more important right now, right? So take any athlete, you mentioned the different levels, pro, college, right? Youth, amateur. As an athlete and a high performance athlete at any of those levels, you're used to your life being based around this thing that you're so driven by, right? So when in that athlete's past, whatever sport it is, have they gone 3 or so months not being around their teammates, not being around their coaches, not being around their trainers, not being around nutritionists, not being around video sessions, right? Obviously different levels based on, not as many nutritionists on the high school level, but you get where I'm saying is that
Right. There's still support. Yeah.
that's what you're used to, right? And so that gets taken away. So, and by the way, that routine, I know we're talking about athletes right now, same thing for everyone in this world, is the last 3-4 months have been pause button, right? And when that happens, it shakes you. It shakes you at your core. And, I think what's interesting is that, we're so used to this routine that we lose identity and we lose purpose when the routine goes away. So let's talk about mental health in the aspect of what most people feel like is going on and then what is actually going on during this time period. So the first is that I put it into like 3 buckets right now. So bucket number 1 is, and I think most people, if you ask them, how has your mental health been impacted, they would relate to bucket 1 and they would refer to bucket 1, which is all the what if scenarios, right? What if I get sick? What if a family member gets sick? What if I'm in the hospital and I have to be there by myself and I'm only talking to people on FaceTime? What if my job gets taken away? What if my job doesn't get taken away, but the market dries up and I there's no money to be had and I'm going to be living poor out, and homeless, right? So those what if scenarios are affecting everyone. And it's kind of like we're the analogy that I make is we've all lived like we're seniors in college over the last 3 or 4 months, where when you're a senior in college, you worked your butt off the last 3 years, You're like, grades don't matter as much. I'm going to be going into the real world next year anyway. So you lay on the couch a little bit more, eat a little more ice cream. Maybe you still go to the gym as hard because you got the extra time, right? But you're not really taking care of your self, right?
Right.
Your spiritual self. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years. Now, why is that analogy so important? Because where do we see such high levels of mental health complications? 21, 22, 23 years old, right out of college, where it's gasoline on the fire because it's this stuff that you haven't dealt with for a year.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, the real world comes into play, which is deadlines and bosses and expectations and paying rent on top of all the shit that you didn't deal with. And right. So that's why we see so many. And in fact, Donna, when she saw me, she was like, how are you coming to me at 34 and not at 22 or 23 after all the things you said? And I think it's because those of us are in a routine and we stay in that routine. It keeps us as a distraction from those things that bother us. So again, it's our greatest strength, but also our greatest weakness, right? So, okay. So bucket number one is the what ifs. And we're living in the what ifs in this college-y senior year type of period. But the other two buckets, we don't think about as much. I touched on bucket number two, but I'll go in a little more detail on it, which is when routine goes away, so does purpose and identity. And so take an athlete, right? Just because we're talking sports. When you wake up every day and you're told by the members of your community or your parents or your coaches, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, get out there and work hard, dude. And now all of a sudden you're playing video games because you have to pass the time, or you're watching things on Netflix. Even though there's stuff in your house that you can do, I can go side to side, make a little, outdoor, obstacle course to keep myself in shape. It's not the same level. So your view of yourself and who you are as a person now all of a sudden takes a hit because you're like, wait a second, if I'm not this, then what am I? And you start voting and you're like, oh shit, like this. So that's bucket number two. Then bucket number three is perfect storm again. We lost all the distractions that we use beyond just the thing that we're passionate about. So what are those distractions? Going to and watching games on TV, going to restaurants with our friends, going to bars with our friends, right? Going to movies with our friends. All these things are things that we would use if you think of the context of stress and trauma building up in our system, mainly in our subconscious often, because we're not constantly thinking about it so often, is we use this stuff, whether it's healthy or not, we could argue that, to buffer down and suppress some of that stuff that we don't want to deal with, right? And we don't want to deal with it until we're ready to deal with it. Well, when those distractions are gone, guess what bubbles up to the surface? And what that looks like, here's what it looked like for me, is your dreams become more anxiety filled and you wake up in the middle of the night in sweats, or you wake up with this weird feeling in your stomach and you're like, why? I just had a full 8 hours sleep. Why do I feel this way? Or you're watching that show on Netflix and you're binge watching, and as a scene comes on, it reminds you of something from when you were 8 years old and you're like, why did that feeling come about? Why did that memory come about, right? These are all things that these three buckets now combine. And when they combine like that, I call it the black hole. We feel like we're floating in this black hole where it's like, what am I going through right now? What am I doing? Like, where am I right now? Is the world even friggin' real with all the stuff that we're going through? You take that now, and now you ask people to go back, athletes specifically, to regimented practices, regimented eating, regimented this and that, and coach telling you this. It's like those college kids that in the senior year going into the real world. Our athletes are not prepared for that transition unless they were fortunate enough to have someone during this 3 or 4 month period that was in their ear saying, from a mental preparedness standpoint, here's the way to release valve, allow that stress and trauma to come out of your system, to do the daily meditations and the yogas and the breathing practices, right? So unfortunately, I think what we're going to see a lot of sloppy play at the beginning. Hopefully they're working through the kinks right now. I think the sports were very smart, even though they lost a lot of time, to build in about a month's worth of time to get the athletes back into game shape. Game shape is not just physical, it's mental also, right? So I'm hoping we won't see as much of it, but there definitely is going to be susceptibility where you're going to see passes dropped and errant passes in basketball and missed free throws and stuff like that, because it's a time period that they've never dealt with before, and now all of a sudden they're going to it. All right, so that leads to programming, which is we go into these schools. We got 5 areas of programming: K through 12, we call same here schools; colleges, we call same here sit downs; offices, we call same here safe, because no one feels safe talking about an office for fear of not getting promoted, losing their job; same here service for servicemen and women and first responders; and then same here sports, only focused on that industry because that's where my background was. So there were relationships to help them out there. And so within each of those, there's about 7 pillars of programming that we take them through. But the idea is we're not a curriculum company. We're not a speech giving company. We're your consultant. We're holding your hands through how to change the dynamic and the culture in your school, in your organization, so that mental wellness is woven throughout, and it's thought of as a positive and a proactive thing that everyone is approaching, as opposed to, I think what oftentimes unfortunately happens too much in this space is, great, we're going to bring in a speaker and we're going to hear what depression and anxiety is and what signs to look out for. You've already eliminated 50+% of your audience that you mandate to be there from even listening to a word that person's saying, right? So it's and I know we were going to talk a little bit about it, but something as simple as, there's a tool that we created called the Same Here Scale app, right? So you think about, if mental health is on a continuum, well, what does that continuum look like? If you start saying words like sad, upset, happy, right? You're again getting into binary terms, even though you're trying to put it on a continuum. It's sick people, healthy people, sad people, happy people. That's it, right? We created a scale. There's 6 spots on the scale. There's emojis to each one of these 6 spots. And it goes from thriving to gliding, surviving, fluctuating, struggling, sinking. And that scale, the whole point of what we're trying to teach students and employees is, on any given day, week, month, year, you can fluctuate up and down on that scale. And that's perfectly normal, fine, and okay. That's what normal is. What normal is not being perfect. Normal is that you're going to fluctuate based on the life experiences that you have. So the app allows, whether it's teacher to student, coach to player, manager to employee, for these different constructs in these different communities to be able to communicate with one another, send each other as frequently as they like, because the app allows you to do it as often as you like, but they build the cadence the way that they want. Requests for where someone is at on that scale, and then a chat feature that allows them to share back and forth, if they want and if they're comfortable, additional information. But right now, without something like that, and this goes for the history of our time, right? What has been the most common conversation we've had when it relates to mental health? It's 2 brick walls talking to each other. Hey, Holly, how are you doing? Good. And you, Eric? Good. And then it stops there. Or okay, fine, or whatever else it is. This at least gives some form of calculation to putting some type of process towards what your feeling is, so you could start to see the trends and start to help people based on where you're seeing those trends developing.
Yeah, we were talking about this app. So it's like those little emojis, like you said. And, if it's a student, they can go in, like with my 8-year-old, we're doing it through her school, and her teacher or her school counselor could send out a message to, they can choose to what students, all the students, or if there's a certain group they're doing that day of the week, and ask them, how you're doing. And they choose where on the scale, and then it allows for the person, child or whomever, to put, why. Maybe they're thriving, and it's because, my parents finally gave in and got me that dog that they keep bugging me for. Or, if they're not doing so well, maybe, mom and dad were arguing about whatever last night, or I don't think I did well on my math test, or whatever it may be. And what I really like, because I'm thinking of our tweens and teens, is that they can lock that feature, right? So they can make it private so that the adult doesn't necessarily see their reason. But the adult can, I think, still see their mood, or is that locked too? I'm not sure. Okay.
No, absolutely. So what do we want to accomplish in the world of social emotional health? We want to get people starting to feel more open about sharing their feelings, right? And when you deal with, take the app out of it for a second, when you're dealing with a client who's not so open about sharing their feelings with you, as their doctor. What's one of the first things you say to them? Write it down in your notes on your phone. Write it in a journal, right? All we've done is we've taken the capabilities of what a journal is, and when you're sending that emotion to someone, we're encouraging them to, yes, write their chat feature in there, but they have the choice to lockbox it, right? Now, lockbox it, all that means is that the teacher can't see it yet, or the parent can't see it yet. And someone might say, oh, isn't that risky because there's information? Well, if you didn't give them that choice, it would stay in their head anyway. So let's get them right. It's still there. It's not like they're creating something that didn't exist. It's that they're now putting it down in a place where it's out of here, right? It's not just stuck in here. And I think what that gets us to eventually is that person does it enough times, they then become comfortable sharing. So yes, you still see the emoticon or emoji, I always forget the right terminology, that they pick. And I guess since we created them, we didn't use existing ones, like we created one specifically for those terms. I guess we could call them whatever they want. Let's just call them like emotion faces. So and each one of them has a different color, and then there was a lot of thought behind why each color for each type of face. But the whole goal of it is you're starting to get people used to thinking about and sharing how they're feeling. If that's the only thing we can accomplish in this, and we don't get early prevention, we don't get nothing comes out of that from a crisis standpoint, but we're just getting people thinking about their feelings and thinking about how do you share, I would take that a million times over, right? Because people don't do that. We're trained to do that. So yeah, so that's
identifying your feeling. Like that sounds so simple, but it can be really hard when you're not even really sure how you're feeling. You just know it's not good.
Absolutely.
So it's like allowing you to think about it and maybe writing something out. I think that's huge. And the next part of that is that if you're using it with kids or young adults or what have you, I think that generation is just easier to put something in an app. But it allows for the teacher, whomever gets that emoticon or what we want to call it, to write back and say, well, why don't you stop by my desk today so we can talk about it, or, kind of have an exchange, and the door's open. So it's not as hard of a conversation as the how are you doing, and you feel like you have to say the
or that the how you're doing is starting from nowhere, right? I mean, the way that we built the 6 emoticons is purposely done that it's 6 and not 7, because if we had a middle one that was 7,
it would always be that one.
That middle one. I'm doing it right, like whatever that like kind of so. Now that we've got the one middle one that's a little more trending towards things are going in a better direction, a little more trending that things are going not so great, we at least have a little bit of an indication of how someone's doing, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, and to some of your questions / comments about it, it's built so that thinking of the school and office community in mind. So for example, I can upload all my teachers at once, and then I can assign every student to them. So I could do it from the teacher level, but if I want to do it from the school professional level and instead of the teacher level, they just become the guardian part on the app, and the student stays the same. It's whoever you assign those students to through a CSV file upload. So the CSV file uploads the back end, and now all of a sudden, if a school says we'd rather these communications and these check-ins happen with the school professional specifically, fine. If we want to have it with the teachers, fine. What we're developing in phase 2 is whoever the guardians are, being able to choose additional guardians to share screenshots of the previous 5 answers from a student, so that, let's say a mom is asking, a dad is asking, or the teacher wants to say, hey, Jimmy's given me these answers in the last 5 days, to the school professional, that can just be filtered through directly to them without having a screenshot and text and do all that stuff. It's meant to be this communication vehicle of emotions across the entire school community.
And is it something that can be on any type of device? Like I'm wondering, like at my kid's school, like not, she's like my 8-year-old, she doesn't have an iPhone, but they have like their accelerated reader computer that they all go to. Is there a way to maybe put it on like a certain computer that each child could maybe check in when they're doing X activity?
Yeah, great question. So I appreciate you asking that. So iOS and Android capable. So either of those 2 devices. The schools that have what you just described. So I'm doing it with a lot of elementary schools. A lot of them have one device in school in each class that is available for all the students to use. So let's use like the strictest, most difficult example. Each student gets their own username and password.
Oh, great.
So think about it. If you were going to ask a student to go and write something on the board or put a sticky note up there or come to the teacher, they'd be doing that stuff anyway, right? So, okay, you only have one device. The cool thing is the teacher is still assigned to all those students. When the student logs in with their personal information, username and password, I don't mean personal information like anything too personal. The teacher has sent the request to the student just goes in and answers where they're at on that scale, right? All the way to they each have their own devices. Okay, great. They each download the app and same thing. They each get a username and password. All the way to older students where the school is okay with personal device to the personal device. The reason why it's not as volatile is because we're not giving out cell phone numbers between the teacher and the student. All that's is we're assigning through the back end that a teacher has a relationship with this student's app. That's it. Through that app, all they can send is the scale and the notes related to the scale. They can't send pictures. They can't send videos. They can't do any of those things. And you never know what each other's cell phone number is. So we've thought of it in terms of the school community is a unique community. It's one that we have to protect and be very careful of what's the right way to build this thing.
So I just think, I mean, I've said to you, like, I just think this is a game changer in so many ways, just knowing how like teenage brains and even young adult brains work and small people. And now that so many schools are going into, you know, possibly all virtual for the year or part virtual, or some parents are choosing virtual, some are going into the school, it allows for all of those folks to stay connected in a way that has been missing for several months.
It's funny. It's funny to hear that. I got an email from a contact from New York City Board of Education last night, right? Which is obviously exciting for us. Like, you know, they're proactively reaching out. And the thing that they brought up is, well, with COVID happening and a lot of students potentially not being able to see their school counselor or their favorite teacher, we're afraid that we're not going to know emotionally how they're doing. This sounds like a perfect solution for us, which I agree with. But here's the interesting thing about it. That's coming in the context of what a COVID world is going to look like. But that should be the case whether there's COVID or not, right? Like just because a student looks happy in class or talks a lot in class or whatever else it is, that doesn't mean they're good or bad or fluctuating or sinking. We need to ask those questions. We need to get them to emote a little bit. And I think what the scale is it's this happy medium between we're asking for emotions. Okay, that's more difficult than we've done before, but everyone in the school sees the same scale, sees the same words, knows everyone's being asked it. And so you don't feel like you're the problem kid who when we went to school, oh, Holly's going to the guidance counselor because she's the one who gets in trouble and she needs to share her emotions right now. No, it's a natural, normal part of our everyday.
Yeah, I mean, and it also, I mean, it gets back to your original story, right? Like you were going through your life with a lot of trauma happening to you and witnessing, you know, someone who you adored facing death multiple times. I mean, that's enough for a post-traumatic stress diagnosis right there. And you felt like you were doing okay, you know, because that's
a fascinating thing. That
tuned in to like maybe what was happening underneath. Like you're doing a great job of what we would call compartmentalizing those feelings and putting them over here. So teaching our kids to start paying attention to what their feelings are day to day is huge. And putting words to that is even bigger. And so many kids might have an experience, whether it be COVID, whether it be Katrina, whether it be all of the things, you know, things we don't like to talk about, but we need to. And no one's asked them, first of all, and they haven't had an experience where they've learned to put words to it. So starting out with that color and face looks like how I feel. Hey, it's a starting point, and it's going to turn into conversation.
And it's different than rate on a 1 to 10, because then you feel like you're bad if you're a 1 or a 2. So let's take that model out of it. And then the ones where it's been like the gradient and I'm kind of reddish, greenish, blue, like that's way too much for a kid's brain to understand, let alone an adult to understand. But you nailed I know we're going long here, but I want to applaud you for nailing it. Is when I was working at the Suns and things felt like you're living in Scottsdale and you're a single guy and you've got this position and things are great. Okay, so how do you notice signs that things are going on? The only way is doing a daily check-in, right? Because generally speaking, Eric's happy. And by the way, that I'm not saying people the way they looked at me. I'm saying the way I actually felt in my head. Things were good. But if I do a daily check-in, all of a sudden it's like 1 out of 7 days, something doesn't feel right. Why is that? Now you get the understanding of things pop up a little bit here and there from your past. All you're doing is you're pushing them down. That's why you're feeling well the other 6 days. And those little bursts that we can see are really important from a directional standpoint to help us feel the best that we can and be proactive about this.
Yeah. So we are getting to the hour. So I know we're going to need to close up, but I want to make sure folks know, I've had a mom already ask, like saying that she'd love this for her kids' school. I know I'm a mom that's also interested. So I want to make sure folks know where to locate more information about Same Here and how teachers, coaches, athletic departments can contact you. So that's probably, I'm guessing the website's probably the most direct way, huh? Is there another way?
I'll quickly run through it so people have it. So samehereglobal.org, if you go to the programs part in the navigation bar, you'll see those 5 different programs that we talked about. Same Here Schools, Same Here Sit Downs, etc. For your school, just click on Same Here Schools. The bottom, there's a form that you can fill out to just submit, hey, I want more information. That's probably the easiest way, so you don't have to remember anything, right?
Right, yes.
For someone who wants to email us directly, funny last name or name ending to our email address. For the school app, we created a email address, schools@weareallalittlecrazy.org. So the using that terminology of everyone being on the continuum. Look, will I have the @samehere.org? I'm going to set that up, but it seems to be in this space, people remember that once they put it in and it gets them thinking. So I go back and forth every so often. But Holly, if you need me to repeat that again, or you got it?
Did I get it? Does that look right?
We are all perfect. Yep, that's perfect. You nailed it the first time. So
paid attention to typing, but I got it.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, and it's like the cool thing is just working with the developers. The backend upload is so easy. It's an Excel file. There's 2 hierarchy: teacher or guardian, and then student. It lumps them together. A teacher can send it out to every student at once or select which students they want to send it to. It's so simple, but it brings me joy only because I have parents who were teachers. Dad was a principal, mom was a language teacher. And to think back to if these things were around when I was in school, right? When you were in school, when all of us were in school, that we could have started to nip this in the bud in terms of putting our stuff out there a little bit and getting used to that would have been so huge. And I wouldn't have spent 2.5 years laying in a bed, but looking back on it, back to your point, sometimes your greatest curse is also your greatest blessing, right? So it happened for a reason. I'm not going to be mad at the world that I lost that 2.5 years of my life, but I guess you also gain the credibility of being Western medicine's guinea pig for that long to eventually get to the point where we're able to help more people.
Yeah. So as we close, folks can check out my website for if you want to tell someone to go watch this episode and see how amazing Eric is and the Same Here organization. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. On Facebook, please like, and hearts I think are good. I don't even know. But yeah, next week I'm going to, because we're starting real games for the Pelicans, I'm going to come on and show some of the things that we've been talking about as far as the stars, things that you can try out, some breathing techniques, things that maybe my husband should do when he's in the booth, but that's another discussion. So Eric, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time and all your knowledge and passion. And yeah, as a mom and an integrative psychiatrist, I can't say enough and thank you enough.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.